presence is a word that is not super well understood. I think it's becoming more part of our collective consciousness, mindfulness, meditation, but it's also something that in the natural resource space feels a little bit squishy. And people aren't, even in any work environment, people aren't used to starting from a place of calm, of presence, of settling into the moment. And yet, before we can get into any action, and that's what my clients bring me in for, is they want to take action. They're looking for solutions. They want to get to the doing of conservation. And we sometimes emphasize the doing and forget the qualities of what it means to be human. We're human beings first, and from that sense of self and sense of others arises our most powerful solutions.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Today's episode was a little bit of a different vibe, but it was really, really great. I think you guys are going to love it. We spoke with Laura Calandrella, and she wrote this book called Our Next Evolution, Transforming Collaborative Leadership to Shape Our Planet's Future. I read the book, and I really found it to be a breath of fresh air. It was really enjoyable. I was hanging on to every word. It really spoke true to some of the things that I had inklings about leadership and collaboration, but I couldn't put into words and I couldn't solidify them. So it really helped me solidify my views and create something that I think is a productive perspective on leadership and collaboration. It just got rid of the haze of confusion of how to do it properly and kind of clarified. It was awesome. Really, really highly recommended. Now the episode today, like I said, it's a little different than normal episodes. It was a little more introspective, not really specifically about the environment or anything like that. It was more about how we prepare ourselves to go into collaboration and to go into leadership opportunities while doing environmental management. And so whether you're in environmental management or not, this is going to be a great episode. You're going to learn a lot. And checking out her book is definitely a must. Please do it. Like I said, it was just great. I can't say enough about it. We'll let the podcast speak for itself. Let the book speak for itself. And Laura's an incredible person, and I hope to stay in touch with her because it was just a lot of fun to have that conversation with her. She was a great guest, and I can't thank her enough for joining me on the episode. And yeah, we'll just let it go. It was a great episode. I can't say more about it. Just prepare to look inwardly. Prepare to be truthful with yourself in the way you see and do things. And I think you'll get something really important out of this episode. And even more so when you get the book. So, sponsors for this week's episode. Wes Fraser is the number one sponsor for 2021, and I could not be more thankful for their help. It has allowed me to do this podcast right, the way I want to do it, and yeah, it couldn't have been as successful as it is without them. So thank you, Wes Fraser. Greenlink Forestry is a secondary sponsor. They've been with me since the beginning. Again, could not have done this without them. Thank you so much, Greenlink, for all of your support. And Damaged Timber is the last sponsor. They are a company in Edmonton, Alberta, and they are making all kinds of cool stuff out of damaged timber. So they go out into the bush, find a wildfire, bring some of that wood back, and turn it into stuff that you can put into your kitchen, like butcher blocks, charcuterie boards, all kinds of neat stuff, custom made, and 10% of everything they sell goes towards an environmental sciences scholarship. So you're supporting environmental sciences and buying cool stuff for your kitchen. Check them out, damagedtimber.com. And yeah, without any further messing around, let's dive into this conversation with Laura, all about collaboration, all about leadership, all about understanding your own biases, stuff like that. You guys are going to love it. Let's do this. Here we go. I'm really, really excited to be able to talk to you about this book just came at a perfect time for me, right? Like I'm in the middle of working with some collaboration with some First Nations and then with just some other things going on and this book, your book, I'll say the title, Our Next Evolution, Transforming Collaborative Leadership to Shape Our Planet's Future. And yeah, it came at a great time because it just really helped me to realize what I should be focusing on in regards to my intention going into collaboration and that kind of thing, and really helped me solidify my understanding of what leadership is and that kind of thing. So, it was just really great timing to be able to do that. So, this is perfect.
Oh man, I'm so honored to hear you say that, and humbled really when you author a book, you do it from your deepest intention and then kind of close your eyes as it goes out into the world and say, okay, let's see what happens now.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, especially with the internet, right? You never know what people are going to think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of support, but there's a lot of silly folks out there too.
For sure.
So, before we get into the presencing exercise, like we discussed, I just wanted to talk about, so like, what is this book about? Just a general overbrief, and what started you down the path of sustainability? You know, like, how did you start down this path? And more importantly, why do you stay on this path?
Yeah, I'm actually going to answer the second question first because it leads into what the book is about. I am trained as a conservation biologist. I've been working in the environmental field for 20 years. And when I was early on in my career, was brought into research projects that focused on community-based conservation. I was super young. I was 19 when I first started. And I had no idea what I was doing, but the research professor that I was working with really put me into these situations where we were bringing multiple stakeholders together, often in developing countries. So there was a lot of dual issues at hand, usually around poverty and environmental issues. And he kept pushing me to take more of a central role in facilitating those conversations. The very first project I worked on was on an endangered species in just outside of Mexico City. So I came in with this conservation biology mind thinking, okay, it's about the species. Let's figure out what to do. And that became clear over 4 years of working on that project that it really wasn't about that, but I was still too young to really recognize what it was that we were doing. Would go on to repeat that experience in multiple countries before I came back to the United States and was working for the United States Forest Service, which manages our national forests and grasslands. And because I had been facilitating conversations so much, and because the Forest Service is so embedded in communities and has so much collaboration that they have to do, that is where my skills got placed. And somewhere along the way, I realized, although we were always coming together around an issue, and although there was a natural resource issue, and although there was science that was at the heart of it, really what was at the heart of it was people. How do people interact with that issue? How do people interact with one another? So dove into leadership development, dove into group dynamics, got certified as an executive coach, really focusing on what motivates behavior change and how do we inspire people to work together to create that change. And eventually left the Forest Service and combined all of those interests, my love and my background and my experience as a biologist. I also worked as an international development practitioner, and this thing that felt so important, which was leadership, that there were solutions at the heart of creating strong relationships. And that's what the book is about. When we talk about collaboration, we're talking about how do we work together to create change, but we're talking about human beings, which are, we in and of ourselves are dynamic, and then we put ourselves in a room together and that creates a dynamic system, and then we're trying to solve problems within the natural world, which is a dynamic system. And so I want to, in the book, break it down into something that's simple, something that is simple perhaps to understand, difficult to put in practice, but that gives us a path forward so that we can begin to tackle the issues together in a way that really leverages our different experiences and perspectives and includes them all in the solution.
That's awesome. First of all, that was something I noticed in the book right off the bat too, is how young you were when you got into this kind of work, and like the experience that you got early on is incredible. Like I can't even imagine being 19 years old, be like, here, facilitate this conversation amongst these people who know what they're talking about. Like,
yeah.
I remember being thrown into my first meeting at what I've been 21, 22, that I was supposed to facilitate. And I didn't really know until about an hour beforehand. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was the one doing the work, so I knew what was going on. But it was still just the nerves and everything else. So like to pull anything off that was even resembling success was a challenge. But I guess that's how you figure it out. Just get thrown to the wolves and figure it out as you go. So it's awesome to hear that you found that path early on, like right out of school kind of thing, or not even out of school, still in school. And to stay on that path, that's great.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it speaks both in your case and my case to the importance of generational teaching. And even in those relationships, like we both got thrown into situations where someone was like, okay, we trust your capabilities, go do it. And that is how you learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And and as to the book, like you were saying, it's interesting that that's the solution, or that's the problem that you found as you were going through, is that the problem isn't necessarily that the science doesn't exist or that the solutions don't exist to these problems. It's the collaboration, and it's the different perspectives, and it's the clashing of minds that tend to get in the way or just fizzle out over time. And that's what really drives solutions to problems, is the people and getting them to work together. And it's so like obvious, but we just miss that all the time. I think I think it seems obvious, but it's just, I don't know, we don't realize it. So it's refreshing in your book to find a book on leadership that is very much about understanding your why, understanding your purpose, and understanding yourself basically before you go in to try to accomplish these things. And I really, really appreciated it. And so with that, at the beginning of your book, you talk about going into these collaborative efforts and doing these presencing exercises to try to create a group intention and kind of an atmosphere of change, I guess. I'm not sure how you explain it, but go ahead and explain what that is. And then we can go ahead, and I'd love to go through one with you to try and set our intention for this conversation, because we still got, well over an hour and a bit to go.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, there's 4 leadership practices in the book, and the first of them is cultivating presence. And I'm sure we'll talk about the other 3, but presence is a word that is not super well understood. I think it's becoming more part of our collective consciousness, mindfulness, meditation, but it's also something that in the natural resource space feels a little bit squishy. And people aren't, even in any work environment, people aren't used to starting from a place of calm, of presence, of settling into the moment. And yet, before we can get into any action, and that's what my clients bring me in for, is they want to take action. They're looking for solutions. They want to get to the doing of conservation. And we sometimes emphasize the doing and forget the qualities of what it means to be human. We're human beings first, and from that sense of self and sense of others arises our most powerful solutions.
Isn't that true? Like, I mean, it's funny. Like, I think everyone has been in a meeting or something where they've sensed that there's a desire to want to accomplish something, but for some reason, when the meeting's over, it kind of ends on a low note. No one's really clear on where we're supposed to go from here. And I think it's exactly that, right? Like, we tend to bring our knowledge and our facts and our intellect to these things, and we forget our purpose, our reason for being there.
Right. And it's not to discount those actions we and our intellect, but we just sometimes live above our neck.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
sure.
like and we've got this like body going around with us, and even living above our neck in our heads, we're not even aware of those beliefs and assumptions and presuppositions that we're bringing into a conversation. So to slow down a little bit and tap into what matters most, it is extremely important. It is allowing you to open up your own field of possibility, but then also be open to seeing others. Because usually there's a point of intersection around what it means to be human.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's just like I was telling you earlier before we started this, is I've recently started meditating again, a practice I started doing a few years ago, and recently started doing it again, just like 10 minutes, not very long, but it's been enough that it's along the lines of like working out for me. Is I've noticed if I don't work out, I'm pretty irritable, right? I notice it in myself. And then the same thing with just 10 minutes of, and meditation sounds very hippy dippy and whatever, right? But really all it is just it's mindfulness, being mindful of your surroundings, being mindful of what's going on in your brain, the feelings happening, what your body's doing, and just being actually in the moment is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it brings me so much, I don't know how to, it's not like relaxation. It's just ease. Like you're not this, I don't know how to word it, but my point is that this is kind of along that lines, is that just setting your intention before you do something and being in the moment, and not trying to outthink the problem or some such thing, right? So yeah, like I think we should just dive into this if you're cool with it, and let's do a short presencing exercise for everybody listening and ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll just, again, I'll emphasize that if presence isn't a word that resonates with you, with your audience, or presence isn't a word that you can even grab hold of to make sense, let's just think of it as a pause to stop doing just for a moment. And I know people are listen to podcasts cooking and in the car and taking a walk. And so I get that. And
Yeah.
to the best of your ability, flow with us in this moment. And then if this speaks to you, go back to it at some other point. But
Yeah, if you're driving, be careful.
yeah, please don't close your eyes if we're driving. But the pause is important because we are so used to just toppling from one moment into the next without really giving ourselves a chance to see what's around us. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a pause. All right. So I'm going to invite you to experience this practice of cultivating presence. And as I said, if you can shut the distractions down around you, whatever those might be, and bring yourself to the present moment. And even the simplest way to do it is just to notice your breath. Notice how deep it is or how shallow it is. Notice whether you're breathing in through your nose or through your mouth. And if you can, cultivate that breath in through the nose and then out through the mouth. So as you do that, take a few more deep breaths. And if you're sitting, sit with ease, but with alertness. If you do happen to be able to do this practice fully, plant your feet on the ground so that they're nice and solid and your hands in your lap. And if it feels comfortable, close your eyes. But again, most importantly, just follow your breath. And as you settle into that, I want to help clear that noisy chatter that we are always having running in the background with a poem from Martha Postlewaite called Clearing. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life. Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life. So as we feel that sense of pause, feel your breath, feel your body, feel your aliveness, just bring a gentle attention to those feelings, a kind of listening attention. What Eastern philosophy teaches us is that the most important thing is to remember the most important thing. So there's this listening inward right now to sense what is it that really matters to you. And to do that, I'll invite you to think of a time when you felt deeply connected to the natural world. This memory may have taken place as a child, or perhaps more recently. Bring it to your mind's eye, envision it clearly, but don't just observe it from the outside. Take a step into that memory. Place yourself there again. And be part of it as though you were there for the first time. Rediscover it. Notice the colors that you see, the sounds that you hear. What can you smell? Can you smell that dense musk of the forest or the waking up of spring? What does the season taste like to you? Maybe there's a campfire in the background. Maybe you're hearing the crunch of leaves. Bring to life anyone that may have been part of this memory. Feel what that connection to them was like. Feel how you shared that moment with them. And as you sit with this experience is uniquely yours. I want you to expand your attention to the physical intention, the physical attention, the physical sensation that you're feeling right now. So in this moment, where do you feel this memory most strongly? Do you feel it in your heart? Or maybe a rush of energy in your arms? How are you sitting? Notice where your body is positioned in your chair. And again, notice the quality of your breath. Finally, notice the emotions that might be there. Is the memory, is the attention to this present moment bringing you calm, delight, melancholy, joy, excitement? You might not actually feel anything in particular, and if you don't, that's okay. But just notice that too. So we're going to linger here just for one more moment. And if there's discomfort with that, allow it to be. And take one more breath. And if your eyes are closed, open them again and bring yourself to the current surroundings, your current space. So Matt, as our listeners come back to the moment, I'm going to flip the podcast onto you, if that's okay.
That makes perfect sense. That's what I'm here for.
Can you share a bit about the memory that you chose?
Yeah, it was actually surprisingly not one that I would have expected, and not even one that I actually associated with nature all that much. It was a memory of my wife and I on our honeymoon in Italy, in Cinque Terre. So we were on these rocky cliffs with the ocean blasting against it, right? And with the sea, I suppose. And there was people everywhere, right? But we were sitting on these rocky cliffs off the trail, watching the ocean, just kind of sitting there eating fried sardines. I don't know why that came to my brain, but it did. And it was interesting that was the one. At first I had other moments that flashed, moments in the backcountry in the Rockies and that kind of thing. But for some reason, that one seemed to hold on, which is very interesting because I'm not a big ocean guy. Ocean terrifies me. I don't mind being on a boat and stuff, but like swimming in the ocean, like, yeah, I'm not a big fan. It just like I didn't grow up around it, so like the darkness and the depths kind of just freak me out, right? I know it's irrational, but it's there. But it was interesting that was the moment that came out, and maybe it was out of a closeness and like the importance of that trip with my wife and I, or maybe it was just, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what it was, but it was good. You never know what the brain's going to bring up, right?
Yeah. And that's completely okay. And as you were describing it to me, I'm picturing this in my mind's eye. And what I'm noticing, what I'm pulling out is you spoke really specifically to the closeness of you and your wife surrounded in this crowd of people or people all around. And, you know, the sound of the ocean and the eating of sardines, there's just so much vividness to what you described even in just a few moments. What does that tell you about what you value?
Tells me that I value my family and those little moments. And strangely, I value mindfulness, I guess, and just being in that moment, right? Like just taking stock. The fact that moment came up, and it was such a fleeting moment, right? Like we might have been sitting on those rocks for 30 minutes at most, like it wasn't a whole day thing. So, yeah, it was interesting. Like it wasn't really even nature that was the highlight there. It was my family, actually.
Yeah.
Which is surprising to me because like nature is such a prominent thing in my life, and it's kind of what I've dedicated in my life to.
Right.
It's interesting that came up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. You know, and so when I do this exercise in groups, it's not always quite as extended. I have shorter practices, and I'm always gauging the level of comfortability and where I can push people past their edges, but still bring them into this moment of presence. But I ask people who have a background in natural resources, there's always a moment. There's always a place where they can land and position themselves into nature. And even if it's, like you said, it's not necessarily a moment that was like especially about nature, but you came to a value that mattered to you. And when I do this in groups, after we do something like that, I will have them get into smaller groups and talk about the memory and talk about what was the impact of the pause for you. What did you notice that was new? What does it tell you about what matters most? And from there, we start to build bridges and start to see one another. There's an openness, although people might resist me at first. As the time goes on, you know, they do see the value. And at the heart of it, you know, and I'll ask you this question. Was there any part of that memory that helps you to see what drew you to your work?
I think the totality of nature actually came through. The fact that I'm not close with the ocean, it's not something that is particularly important to me. But you know, the forests and the mountains and freshwater lakes and that kind of thing very much are. What was interesting was the totality of our natural world and how it's all interconnected, and to affect one part of it affects everything. So when you hear about, you know, the problems that are happening in the ocean, you start to recognize how that impacts the things that are directly important or close to you. So I think that was kind of where my brain went with it. Yeah.
And if you had to boil it down into a couple of sentences, what do you care about?
I care about people. People should be around and we should be able to thrive. I also care about the sustainability of our natural world, not just for the sake of the planet, but for the sake of people. Ultimately, it's for the sake of people that I care, right? I mean, that sphere expands out to include animals and the cosmos and all that kind of stuff, or if you want to get real, philosophical about it. But yeah, I think it tells me that the sustainability of our planet is completely, like, it's up to us, and it's dependent on the actions of people, and ultimately people are the ones we care the most about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the first thing that you said, or one of the first things, was that you pointed towards interconnectedness, the interconnectedness of our ecosystems, and our interconnectedness with those ecosystems.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. The fact, like I said, with the fact that I thought of the ocean, and the ocean's not particularly important to me, it made me go down this path of, well, how is this related to my understanding of nature, right? So yeah, it was interesting. I loved that. That was really great. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I hope our listeners got something out of that. I know, like you say in the book a bunch of times, right? Like the scientific community is not one that is necessarily, we don't often talk about our passion or our reason for being there, our emotions. Meetings are often very hard facts, hard science. What is the solution? How do we do this? How do we do that? We often seem to neglect our reason for being there, which is what's driving it and will continue to drive it and find those solutions, right? So I think it's so easy, like you said, I'm sure you come across it all the time, for people to dismiss a practice as simple as this and be like, oh, that's just some hippie bullshit. Like I'm fine, right? Like I'm the best at what I do, and let me do it. And it's like, but how much better could you be if you understood yourself better?
Right. And even more simplistically, like as we go through the book or the practices rather, and we get to those places where we get really charged up that someone's disagreeing with us, just that simple of like, okay, where's my breath? Where are my sensations in my body? What matters most? And even extending it to what matters most to this person. It's just if you practice it on these deeper levels, you can rewind to it quicker when you're in the moment, when you just want to like lash out. Like,
Yeah.
I am right.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, there's so often in meetings where you just get people that are hard-headed and they just don't want to budge, and you realize that they stopped listening 30 minutes ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this type of practice helps people to recognize when they're making those irrational and very emotionally driven decisions, to tune out and harumph their way through the rest of the meeting, right? I think it's perfect to point out to that. People ask, like, if you can recognize that anger or that emotion in yourself and ask yourself, wait, why do I feel like this? This person's not attacking me, but they're attacking an idea that I hold true. Let's find out why. And maybe we can come to some kind of, understanding, right? So maybe they're just misunderstanding each other. I think that's so common. And yeah, it's funny trying to make the professional world more personal.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I love it. I really love it. And that message of understanding yourself and recognizing your biases and all that, it flows through the entire book. And so I appreciated how, again, that interconnectedness was there. You did an excellent job of tying it all together. Now, let's change gears a little bit, and let's start talking about some of the concepts in this book a little more. Like, one very simple one is, how would you define good leadership? Like, what really is the role of a leader, and what are the qualities that they should possess? Because I think there's an understanding that, like, a good leader is confident and assured and has, strength of character. They maybe are the most knowledgeable person in the room, right? The person you go to for advice. But through reading your book, I've come to recognize that that's not really what leadership is. That's kind of more mentorship and some other thing, right? So yeah, what is a good leader to you? How would you define it?
And when I hear you describe those qualities of leaders, I think that that's it's our mental model around what leadership is, which is very positional or hierarchical. And as I describe in the book, leadership can be shown even in followership, right? So we have to have that give and take when we're working in collaborations of recognizing the different dynamics in the group and when a certain kind of leadership is needed. When do we need vision versus action? When do we need to be caring about, relationships versus looking for insight and perspective? And all of those four qualities need to exist in a collaboration in order to move us forward. And part of our job as developing as leaders and collaborative leaders is to learn how to move through those four types of leadership in order to balance out the group, asking ourselves, okay, we have a ton of visionaries in the room right now. How can I move into a place that's providing perspective or that's focusing on action or relationship? But the thing when in my consulting practice and my coaching practice, I talk a lot about creative leadership and or generative leadership, that our job as leaders is to generate something novel and new together, right? It's not about whose idea is right. Collaborative leadership at its most powerful will take all of the perspectives and create an idea or a solution that's never been seen before, instead of just kind of coming to consensus on one that's already there. The way to do that in our personal leadership and then also collectively, there's basically three components that I help leaders work towards, is a balance between how we focus on relationship, who we are, our integrity, our values, and our own personal mission in life, and then results. The strategy, the vision, the decision making. And so it's not, if we're too heavy in any one of those areas, we tend to fall back into some reactive leadership qualities, but we want to be in this creative space. And how much more fun is it to be in a creative space where you don't have to know all of the answers, and that you're allowed to not know all of the answers.
So much pressure. There's just so much pressure to be right all the time and to be the boss and to be the whatever, right? It's like, yeah, let's all realize that everyone's perspective is different. Mm-hmm. And like something to me that just in the last few years, mostly through doing this podcast, and I grew up in a small town, northern Alberta, a lot of First Nations friends and that kind of thing. And we often experience the First Nations cultural events when they would come to the school and do dances and that kind of thing. But never really, because I was a child, right? Like I didn't know what I was doing, and there was some inherent racism and stuff like that there that was just a misunderstanding of how the world works, right? And I saw my perspective as being real and their perspective as being like, oh, it's some like old school, irrelevant way of thinking. And as time has gone on, like I've very much changed. Mm-hmm. And as I've developed more of a relationship with people who grew up speaking Cree and following their traditional values, I start to see so many answers to the Western world's problems in the way that their culture works and the way they do things, right? Mm-hmm. And it's completely different from ours. And it'd be so easy to dismiss their understanding as non-scientific or whatever, but their perspective provides so much insight and so much value that is not ours. And all we need to do is be open to their perspective, and the things that might come out of that collaboration are incredible. And I've been so grateful to be able to collaborate with one individual in particular, Fabian Gray, actually, who I had on the podcast a while back. And he's been, I don't think I've ever told this to him actually, but we don't see each other often, but he's been such a teacher and helping me understand and helping me see differently and helping me to step out of my own ego. Right. And so I've started to recognize that was the collaborative effort I was talking about at the beginning that helped, that this kind of book helped me sort out. And I haven't had opportunity to put it really into action much yet, but it's helped me understand in my brain what collaboration is and what leadership is, and to not get egotistical about it and that sort of thing, right? Don't worry about you have to have all the answers. Just be honest, and that's how things move forward, right? There's no need for the veil. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And what's cool about what you're describing is it's as simple as sitting down with someone and having a person-to-person conversation. I change is hard. Personal change is hard. Collective change is hard. And so I intentionally call these leadership practices, because you can't swallow them all whole at once and expect to be, a master at them.
Oh my
And
God. I'm
so
going to
it's,
be referencing your book for the next 10 years for sure.
oh, I love it. Thank you. But yeah, and I also try to just simplify it down. I grew up in Arizona. So, the Navajo Nation is very, very strong, and that culture is very much throughout Arizona. But sort of similarly to you, it was culture that was brought in and then culture that was brought out. And so there is just something as simple as, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's get to know one another as people. And there's so much learning that can happen from sharing our experiences.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said at the beginning, when it comes to your, you were thrown into this collaborative thing early, and you realized early on that this is the solution to our environmental problems that we have. And I think it's probably evident to people listening now that that's true, right? That's how we get there together. But yeah, let's dive into it a little bit more, right? And I kind of want to talk about the importance a little more clearly about the importance and role of leaders when it comes to collaboration. You described it a little earlier about, there's different types of leaders that help provide different insights and different help when it comes to collaboration. But yeah, let's just talk about that role and how to get started. If you wanted to start a collaborative effort, like how would you begin that?
Right. Generally, and this is just this is what I see in my clients, and this is a perfectly fine trajectory. I think the leadership component is recognizing where you might back up. I mean, generally we rally around an issue. We see something that is important in the natural world, and I'll talk a little bit about a forestry initiative that I'm involved in the Southeast, but generally it's one or two people who recognize that there is some issue that is bigger than they individually can solve, their organization can solve, or even a joint partnership can solve. And there's a recognition that we need to see the issue from 360 degrees to actually find a new path forward. And let's just talk about this client. The client is actually a set of like 40 partners that have come together around southern forest conservation. The South is one of the most rapidly developing part of the United States. I think it's like 86% of the land is in private ownership, so it's a very high threat of development. People have more economic incentive to sell their land for development than to responsibly manage it for forests.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not, and then also those private lands intersect with public lands, and they're not necessarily all in this like whole ecosystem that you see in public land. So that's an issue that's way bigger than, okay, how do we buy up all the land and conserve it, right? That's not the solution. So
got a few billion laying around. Yeah.
Right. And then, okay, then how do you convince those people to actually that you're trying to buy it from, and what is the right land? So you even need that science perspective, right? Maybe to create a healthy ecosystem, we don't have forests in the right places. So these are all the questions that come up, and the Forest Service was actually one of the leaders in pulling this group together. But I think the first question, but they wanted the answer, like they wanted to dive into action. Like, well, what are the action? Let's go there first.
Yeah.
And go ahead. Yeah.
No. I was just saying, yeah, I've noticed that as well. Like you have an initial meeting and it's like, okay, so what do we do? And it's like, whoa, let's, let's sort out what the problem is exactly first. And then, yeah, so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
just an exclamation of agreement.
Yeah, well, no, and I get kind of riled up and excited about this, so please interrupt me. But so if you're looking at the practices in the book, which are cultivating presence, creating space, leveraging diversity, and sustaining dialogue, if you're thinking about those in advance of starting a collaborative effort, you're thinking about that presence exercise that we just went through. What are the multiple purposes that need to be involved in this conversation? What are the best physical spaces or in our current world, like how do we draw people together in a virtual space that makes people feel invited, or gives them the opportunity to say no, right?
Mm.
Like that's just as important. Um, and then bringing those diverse perspectives in and understanding that the range of diversity is going to only enhance our ability to find new solutions, and then staying enough in dialogue to really understand what the whole issue is, right? Because
Mm.
the Forest Service had one perspective, recognized they weren't the only one, and brought in all these partners from across all sectors to help them see it. But your listeners are not going to like this with with the size of the challenge that we're facing in the Southeast, and I live in Atlanta, which is why I say we. Um, it took us about 3 or 4 years to actually get to these are the strategies and actions, but it
Mhm.
took that long. One because there was a resistance at the beginning to like move through these practices, and
Mhm.
then two, because it takes a while to understand the problem and to see things holistically.
Mm. That holistic perspective, right? That's something you talk about a lot, and I think, it's something that's direly missing, right? There's an assumption that the people with the degrees or the doctorates are the professionals. They're the ones we should have, and that's true. You definitely need them at the table. They're the ones who have the scientific evidence and that kind of thing. But like you said, there's other perspectives out there that help fill in the gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about the science, but it's about people's values. Like I recently had, I think you said you listened to that episode, but a conversation with Mila Mihalovic where we talked about values, and the one before that too. We talked about values and putting values into reality, and how do we gather up all of the values that the forest contains and manage them equally so that we can maximize every single one, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is, a forest company can't do that alone because they only have the one perspective. We need to include everyone else that's at the table to even attempt to do that. So and a lot of those people aren't going to be scientists, right? They're going to be recreationists. They're going to be First Nations. They're going to be like other industries. They're going to be whatever. And I'm realizing now as I kind of go through my life, and I'm starting to figure myself out more and more. When I was almost a scientific, like on my way to a scientific zealot almost. Where I was like, no, science, everything science, right? And that's still where my brain goes initially, right? But I've really, really started to recognize the importance of other perspectives and allowing it. What it almost does is it allows the science to take different meaning, come to different conclusions, right? And this book helped bring that out, which was awesome. Really, really great. So, yeah, I know of so few examples of when someone was able to bring together all those stakeholders together and to successfully navigate that collaboration to come out with good things. And it almost always seems to take years when it's a lot of people involved, which in the environment, I mean, how can it not be a lot of people, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. And it's an acceptance of beginning the journey. And the thing is it will get easier. It won't necessarily take years. And we are trying to get to action. That is the point. But, and I think there needs to be a willingness to dive into action. You don't need to know everything completely, which is also a hang up, I think, that scientists get into. Again, I raise my hand. I'm trained as a scientist, so
Same,
I can't discount myself from that. But,
oh yeah, my ego drives the bus most of the time.
But I'll even
ask my wife.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm not married. There might be a reason. I don't know. But you were talking about that you're involved in inventory analysis, and so the science is so important, right? That is so important, but we interpret it in different ways. One of the cool things that we did in this project, this forestry project in the Southeast, is
I don't think you mentioned the name of it.
It's called Keeping Forests. The website is keepingforest.org. But so there's all of this mapping that's gone on around future forest retention and loss. And so there's the hard science, right? We can point to science. But then when I came in, one of the things that we did was identify what are those forest values that are most important collectively. So it was water, it was human health, it was biodiversity and habitat, it was recreation, it was fiber, it was resilient economies, it was culture, heritage, sense of place. So what we did, the exercise that I led them through, which again, it's putting all of those 4 leadership practices into play, was to map them. So show me on a map where those values show up. And it's kind of subjective. And so they did that, and then we handed it to the scientists who'd done the future forest retention mapping and asked her to ground truth it. And it was fascinating to because she put in these overlays of how these values showed up. So we can do the soft stuff and interpret it into science, but at the end of the day, we still have to make sense of it. Okay, what does this mean? And go back to what's most important to us. So there's a blend.
Absolutely. Well, and going back to a little bit to the beginning there, like being in tune with one's emotions may seem irrelevant to professional knowledge and job ability. And like in forestry, right? That's my perspective. Forestry is inherently a hard science, industry, even though we all got into it because of the feeling we have of calm and presence when we're in nature, right? None of us got into it. I say this again and again. We didn't get into it because of holy man, I love 2x4s. No, you got into it because of the forest and the feelings you get when you're in the forest. So it's like we lose that feeling when we're at work. It becomes about hard facts instead of the part that makes us human and drives our passion.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And there's a chapter that I write about dialogue, and I bring in one of the sort of forefathers of helping us understand what dialogue was, who had played a really critical role in creating the atomic bomb. And later in his life, I chalk it up to he was having an existential crisis. I mean, super scientific dude, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, and brilliant in being able to create the science and understand the science, be at the forefront of the science that led to the atomic bomb. But as I read his work, his name is David Bohm, I think he had some sort of existential crisis that wow, what have I done for humanity? And so science is inherently connected to, it's what are we creating with our science, and how does it impact others? And I'm just going to pull up this quote really quickly because we keep talking about where science intersects with other things. He said,
I was going to bring up the quote as well, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I was going through my notes.
You do it. No, you do it. I want you to do it.
Oh, okay. Well, I gotta find it. Then. You go ahead. You go ahead.
So he says, this division of art and science is temporary. It didn't exist in the past, and there's no reason why it should go on in the future. The ability to perceive or think differently is more important than the knowledge gained.
Yeah. It's interesting that guy went that way, right? It's interesting to know that guy was such a hardcore scientist and started to realize the importance of stepping outside of that. Yeah, and along those lines, right? I had something I wanted to. And can you kind of go a little deeper into the limitations of science when it comes to making these kind of decisions? And I guess we'll tie it into diversity, right? This is kind of where we're going with this, is to get all of the values at the table to discuss. You need a diverse group of people. You need a diverse group of understandings and experience, right? And when you talk about diversity in the book, you don't just talk about minorities. You're talking about life experience and just ways of looking at the world. So that you described it as the full range of the concept of diversity. And So yeah, what is the role of diversity when it comes to filling the gaps that science has difficulty expressing?
So let's first say, because I think it's really important in this world, and to underscore, science is extremely important. You know?
100%. My entire life is dedicated to it. So we're not saying screw science. We're just saying
Yeah.
maybe we can step off our high horse and look at it. Like, it helps us interpret it differently, right?
Yeah. So it's two things, right? It's when we think about even the questions that we're asking in science, who is asking those questions? Because going back to what matters most, if it's the strongest voice in the conservation world, which there are some very particular characteristics and types of lived experiences that show up particularly in forestry. And, I'm often one of a handful of women in the room when I walk into a room that's focused on forestry. And that's just, so that's just where we are. But think about how that drives even the questions that we're asking, or how we're thinking about it, or the experiments that we might design, or the hypotheses that we might design around that. So, so science falls short before it even starts, because we're not asking a range of questions. And then from there, the interpretation of science, again, is only driven through our lens. So there is an outcome. We can say this is what's going, this is the end of that experiment. But then what do we do with that? And where does it fit? So that requires multiple perspectives as well. So it's at every stage of the scientific process, and from preconception to conception to experimentation to result to analysis to implementation. We could benefit from expanding who's involved in that and how we bring them in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm a perfect advocate for no diversity in forestry. I'm a plaid-wearing, bearded white dude, so it's kind of your stereotypical forester, right? And it's a problem. You're right. Like, it's not that those people shouldn't be in it. It's that we need other viewpoints as well. And I think in just this past couple years, the influx into university and the technology programs for forestry have been majority female in Edmonton, at least.
Oh,
and
cool.
So that's been one step. I mean, I think it's still majority white and majority small town, not a lot of city people, or not a lot of whatever, right? So there's a lot of other perspectives, not a lot of Indigenous people either, which is another thing, right? And so there's a lot of other perspectives that I just can't imagine what we're missing out on in the scientific world, because we just have the same kind of people going at the problem over and over again. We're stuck in this worn out thought pattern, as you describe in the book. And it's frustrating, because you're just like, I just want to, I feel like other people could help. And like, but how do I get them involved, and how do I convince them to care? Right. So it's, the diversity aspect is just, I think that might be one of the most important parts of this entire book, is just having the most vast array of perspectives and people that you can to try and solve a problem, because you never know where the solution might come from, or the light bulb might come from.
And I think even with like, there's technical forestry, and what I see as a trend in academia is that people are entering into more integrated kinds of science. What do we call them? Programs. Looking at problems more holistically, and there is absolutely a need for technical forestry. We need technical foresters to be able to do, to ensure that all of the ways that a forest are managed are done in that technical way. But what if that was part embedded in a school where those foresters are, integrating with the wildlife people,
Yep.
integrating with people that are looking at climate issues,
Yep.
integrating with people that are looking at science policy. My degree was in something called biology and society, and I focused specifically on conservation and environmental studies. This was back in 2002, and I think that I went to Arizona State. There was a lot of foresight there in them creating that program and recognizing none of our technical environmental issues or biological science issues can be exclusively looked at through the scientific lens. We have to understand how they interact with society. So there may even be ways that we start to think about where does forestry as an education belong within our schools.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, that's bang on. Like I totally completely agree. I'd recently just completed a forest industry lecture series kind of podcast thing because, we got the pandy going on here. So and that was a lot of what we discussed, right? Was the creativity isn't really there. The change isn't really there for some reason. And then trying to discuss how do we get that back? How do we get, and I think the answer is diversity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to expand that degree or that diploma to include not just the forest aspects and stuff. And I mean, when I did my degree, we did ecology, we did soils, we did entomology, we did all sorts of things, right? And there's lots of electives, but I think there was no you almost need to be forced to do some engineering stuff and
Mm-hmm.
maybe some nursing stuff or some teaching stuff, and just to expand the way you think
Mm-hmm.
and maybe see things from a different perspective. And I completely agree that the way we look at traditional education, it's done us pretty well. Like I'd say very, very well, but there's definitely room for improvement in expanding the diversity of content.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's going back to that second practice in the book of creating space. We have to create the kinds of environments where people actually feel curious and welcome to explore those different aspects. And so again, I think, schools are the way that we first develop, how do
Mm-hmm.
we create those spaces within educational platforms, and then how do we translate those spaces into post education environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And keeping that purpose in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did you come here? Why are you so driven? And I think that's something that's so crucial in my life now, is that I'm constantly daily reminding myself and just questioning myself of, why am I doing this work? Why am I here? What is my purpose for being here? And is this where I'm supposed to be, kind of thing, right? This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And the answer is yes. And but it's interesting to look at your life that way instead of just kind of hammering through it, doing your job, making your money, having a house and a home and a family and all that good stuff. But it changes it a little bit when you start to always be wondering about your why and then how to accomplish that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And bringing diversity definitely is going to help us accomplish our whys. It seems like.
Right. Well, I think going back to my belief that relationship is the catalyst for change, one, you don't have to do it alone. Right? Like this is isn't that a relief too, that this exploration and growth, you do not have to do it alone, nor should you be doing it alone, that you have
Mm-hmm.
as many partners in crime as you want to
Yeah.
create, and then also not making it so dang heavy. The poem that I read to you at the beginning of the presencing exercise, it starts with, do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands. Right. So
I like that a lot.
it's just, we can, think about what is my purpose in the world? What is my why? And the reason people don't hang on to the practice of presence is because that's overwhelming. So start
Totally.
smaller, you know,
Good
what,
point. Good point. Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have figured out mine, and you're right. Finding that is the bane of every student, right?
mm-hmm.
You're in high school, and like, what are you going to do with your life? Come on, why don't you know? Figure it out. What are you talking about? You're 17. You should know already. What are you doing? Like, how come you don't know? You're an idiot. Figure it out. Like, it's just like, yeah, I completely agree. That's true too.
What's your why?
My why? Good question. Wow, nice. I like the way you did that.
I'm curious, but yeah.
Yeah. My why, I believe, is to, when it comes to professional stuff, is I just want to expand our understanding of our interaction with nature and try to improve it to a point where we don't end ourselves. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, more specifically, I guess right now, I'm trying to bring the realization to people, like the intent of this podcast, for example, was part of fulfilling some of my why, I think, was first and foremost for me to learn. Mm-hmm. That was the selfish reason for doing it, and learn more so that I can be more effective, but then also to provide information so other people can learn to try to make more informed decisions. And I think I don't know, it's a crazy path, because as you go, it just changes constantly. It's never what you think it's going to be. And my why, I think, is constantly changing as well. Mm-hmm. Right? Like from one day to the next, I'll give you a different answer. But I think my why, as far as my professional stuff, is, to try to make our natural world a more sustainable and enjoyable space for people. Right? Mm-hmm. And that includes, I think within that is included, the sustainability of nature as a whole, mm-hmm. right? So, I guess at a meta level, that's what it is.
Very cool. Well, and I love that you're pointing to the fact that, like, you ask me tomorrow and it may be different, and you just keep taking action, and that's the putting the practices into places to result in action. And I kind of describe the hero's journey in the collective action piece of the book, because if we think of ourselves like Luke Skywalker going out on his adventure, which is the most classic example of the hero's journey, we're called to action. We decide to move out towards our purpose. We put something into play. We meet challenges. We find a guide. We, learn from it and emerge with new learning. And then it complete, you bring that back to the world, share it, and keep going. And it's about doing that quickly in much simpler terms, if you're not, and especially if you're not into Star Wars, which I don't know why you wouldn't be, but that's another story, is, what is your vision? Act on it, learn from it, adjust, revamp, keep going.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes, I think, is crucial.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That just paralyzes you. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, it's just, you'll never speak up in a meeting. You'll never speak your piece. And just don't worry about what people think if you can help it, and just try to move in a direction and adjust course as you go. Mm-hmm. So speaking to that, what kind of advice would you have to people who are trying to find their why? I think most people listening to this, they'll have some kind of ethereal, idea about, like, they have a connection to nature. I think you're not listening an hour into this podcast unless you're into nature to some degree, right? Mm-hmm. So, but if people are struggling with maybe finding their why, right? If it's that, whatever it is, how would you help people or guide them to sort that out in themselves?
So I'll give you sort of the heady answer, and then maybe the more spiritual answer. Well, let's start with the spiritual. You know how I really started on this path? I mean, not to say that I knew my purpose when I was a little kid, but I spent a lot of time in nature. I spent a lot of time observing the natural world. I listened to, how it spoke to me and what it spoke to me about. And you talk about the First Nations. I talk about my experience growing up with Native Americans. This is part of those traditions as well, is what's speaking to you. And how does that how does the natural world really speak to you? And if you allow yourself to, I don't care if you're meditating in nature. I find a lot of enjoyment just riding my bike and listening to the birds and hearing the wind and feeling that on my face. So I think, it's the starting there, right? Like, because as you said, if you're listening to this podcast an hour in, there's a lot of wisdom that can be gained from something that you already enjoy. But then it's going to looking across your life, like looking at those values. What do you value most? Where do you find yourself curious, wanting to learn? And like, what are people constantly coming back to and asking of you?
Yeah.
Not in a way that's draining, but that is showing you your gifts and showing you your impact. And it's not this perfect thing. I mean, it's taken 40 years to try to put something together that finally feels like, oh, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think that's it too, is patience in the exploration.
Oh yeah. I think you're right. Like, even when I was both my parents were foresters, and even when I was in forestry school at the university, I still didn't know for sure. I knew I loved nature and wanted to be involved somehow, and forestry just made sense. But I don't think I really figured out my general path in life until, honestly, probably till I started this podcast, where I started to really understand what I can contribute, right? And speaking to that point you made, like, what do people keep coming back to you about? Like, a perfect example that I have is my wife, who her entire life, people have been coming to her and just spilling their guts, just telling her their like deepest, darkest problems. And since she was, I think, in junior high, she said she wanted to be a psychologist, and that's where she went. And she absolutely loves her job. Like, she has her dream job right now, and she couldn't be happier. And she was so lucky to find that early on in herself. And so many people aren't that lucky, right? They go through multiple years of schooling, and you could be 50 or 60 years old before you figure out what you actually wanted to do. And it sucks for those people. And I wish there was a way to help people sort it out. But I guess the answer would be to just try as many things as you can and be mindful of how it makes you feel and what you actually want to do, right?
Yeah. And there is the reality of too, that if at one point in your life you're waking up to, wow, I'm really not doing what I want to do, and you have a mortgage and you have kids, and in case of many forestry professionals, live in rural areas, and so there's not this giant economy to tap into, to be able to settle into the idea that part of this is a journey of learning and exploration and breaking through the barriers that you're putting on yourself for what you can and can't do. So really starting to think creatively. You said the podcast, like, you can sit in your house and do this podcast. And I'm curious if part of why it's helped you to find your voice and your purpose is because you're getting to be in relationship with other people, and right, that creating a space for conversation that's happening that helps you to see different perspectives and clarify what you're doing and why it's important.
That's absolutely what it is. I think I've just had a hunger for a curiosity about knowledge around our natural world and the way people contribute and how people are involved. So absolutely that's what it is, right? That connection to people and really digging deep into, that's what I try to do with every conversation, right? Is to dig beyond the science. And early on, I didn't. Early on in the conversation, I was just spouting facts, right? I was like, forestry sustainable and stuff like that. And they were necessary and they were good and people liked them, and I'm glad. But as I've gone through this, I think around 2019, I started to dive a little deeper into these conversations, and not so much talking about the details of things, but more about people's purpose. Purpose sounds like they know what's, like, you know what I mean? They've figured it out. Like but I mean, you know what I mean? Their drive for doing what they do and their passion for doing it. And that, I think that's been a better story, and it's been more fruitful for me as it's more real, right? Like, I can actually connect to the person instead of just trying to find the best analytical question to ask next. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's been it's been cool. We're way off base when it comes to leadership and collaboration, but I guess it's all relative.
Yeah. Well, and Matt, I really was curious. It wasn't a leading question, but I was also a
Nope.
tiny bit trying to set you up.
Yeah.
It's like I mean, right? Like
That's fine.
through relationship you're learning, and through relationship you're helping others to learn. And you
Yeah.
said like that's a much more interesting story. It goes back to our who we are, kind of as animals. We learn through story, or a quality that's unique to humans is we learn through story.
Yeah.
And even our science is a story. Our science tells a story, which, how do we continue to create a story that's meaningful so that people want to be involved and want to create change?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, this book is really incredible, and I really appreciate you writing it, because it's it came at a great time in my life, and I think it's something that I will reference regularly, just to try to recognize my own biases and that kind of thing. And like, actually, that's something that you speak about a little bit, right? Is the importance of recognizing bias, or sorry, I'm all over the place today. Recognizing bias and the difficulty of that, right? Can you describe, because I think that's so common in the professional world, is people fail, the ego gets in the way, right? And the bias takes over and runs the show. How do we start to convince people to be able to step out of their own head for a moment and not look for reasons to like lash out in a meeting or that kind of thing, but to look for, why am I reacting this way? And to try to step out of that emotion and try to recognize that bias in yourself so that things can move forward instead of, coming to a halt.
Yeah. I want to start by saying that biases are completely normal. Excuse me.
Yes.
We have biases because they help us to operate on a day-to-day basis so that we're not constantly having to learn things over and over. Our bias for getting run over in traffic just helps us to automatically look both ways before we cross the street. If we had to be thinking about that every single time and be so conscious of that, our days would be filled with every single moment being a decision. So I want to normalize that for people. I just want to say, like, it's okay that you have biases, just recognize that you have them. And in more complex kinds of situations, bringing just that acceptance into the room, just saying, okay, I accept that I have biases. I accept that other people have biases. And as a group, when I work collaboratively with people, we go through a process of going, like, we all have biases. We need to start to label them and in a healthy way be able to question other people's biases, and letting people know that that's okay too. There's something, I don't think I talk about it in the book, but it's definitely part of my my facilitation and coaching practice. And this is just a quick tip for all of you out there. Why questions put people on the defensive. The immediate, like, as soon as you say, well, why do you think that? It's like, oh gosh, I've got to defend my answer. Instead of like, what is important about that? Or how are you seeing that way? How are you seeing that? Help me to understand. So language is really important too. So accepting, labeling them. So, I have a bias for science. I have a bias for relationship, right? I'm going to go to that first. And then being able to mitigate it in some way. So identifying, is this person similar to me? Like, and that's what I've got, why I have a bias for them. So what can I do to mitigate that? And I do talk about in the book, there is a model that this is all based off of that's not mine. And I talk about the different biases, the five broad categories of biases that, we can, that are most common. And so I would point people to that, or if you just want to look up online, something called the SEEDS model, SEEDS model, that gives a really good synopsis of what I'm talking about there. It's neuroscience, right? Our brains just do this. They make shortcuts because that's what's helped us to survive. Usually in the past, shortcuts, as we were hunter-gatherers, shortcuts helped us to know to like stay away from saber-toothed tigers, Right. Did I
Yeah.
answer your question? I feel like I kind of went on a circular pattern.
I was listening to what you were saying and I kind of forgot what my question was. So I don't
Okay.
know. It's okay. We can move on. I think
Okay.
it was about bias. I think it was about the importance of discovering bias in
Okay.
oneself. And I think that the core of the question that I was asking was just how, when we're trying to go through a collaborative effort, do we ensure that collaborative effort succeeds? And obviously this entire book is about that, right? So I recognize that's a big question, but more when it comes to our own, because we can only control ourselves really, and then ask others to do the same. And so how do we prepare ourselves to take on that role of having to collaborate and create a dialogue with people that we may disagree with, but we know we need in order to come to a solution, right? So how do we prepare ourselves to, like we were talking about, to check your bias and just be aware of it, and to try to maybe internalize what other people are saying instead of focusing on our own perspective, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that I think we also have to accept that there is a bias that every collaborative effort is going to be transformative. There is a bias that every collaborative effort is going to be successful. And there is a bias that everyone is coming in seeing the issue the same way and having a desire to solve it in the same way. So a lot of energy gets dumped into trying to make something collaborative that just isn't going to get there.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay to just to what we're calling collaboration really is like, we just need to coordinate our efforts, or we need to be in better communication with one another. That's
Right.
okay. Recognize that as quickly as you can, so that you can do those things effectively. And those are important contributions to the world. When I'm talking about collaborative leadership, it's really having an honest conversation at the start. Or are we committed to this bigger purpose?
Yeah.
And then setting cultural norms in place that are saying, asking ourselves, what are our practices around challenging bias? How do we want to be with one another when divisiveness flares? And that's kind of why I have a job, because people hire me to do that, because this is not part of normal practice. But why I wrote that book is I only have so many hours in a day, and I don't need to be the only one that knows how to do this. And I've done some training with other coordinators of collaborative efforts and helping them to put some of these practices into play. But and I would recommend that no matter what, whether it's someone who, is trained in the same way as me or not, I would recommend bringing somebody in from the outside, because you can't see what you can't see. And having an objective third party, having someone guide you through even the questions of, do we just want to communicate, or are we trying to transform some sort of system, is really, really helpful. So yeah, I would encourage that as well, so that you're not always having to do that for yourself.
That's a good point. Like, hey, read this book, and then like it's all on you. Like, bring someone in who's like does this for a job. Like it's someone who can help you. Exactly, another part of the collaboration thing. But it's ultimately, like you said, it all comes down to building good relationships, strong relationships that allow us to be honest and truthful, and not have to hide intentions or whatever else. So. This was a really, really great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This was, again, your book was great, and I encourage everyone to go out there and to get it. You can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. On Amazon, and I'm sure it's going out into regular bookstores too, I'm sure. But it was excellent, and I got a lot out. It helped me, like, I think reading it, what it did for me was it solidified some thoughts that I maybe already had inklings of. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of helps you. It helped me let go of that kind of breath that I didn't know I was holding. You know what I mean? Like kind of those. It just helped me solidify thoughts that I kind of already had an inkling of, and just to make them solid so that I can lean on them a little more, right? So it was really, really great. And yeah, congratulations on this. Is your first book, right?
It is. And I just want to respond to you. Well, thank you for the congratulations, but how beautiful. Like, to just have one person say that to me is worth the effort of writing the book. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure we could go on forever. It's, I try to close them off about an hour and a half because I feel like going on for 3 hours. It's just me going off on my ego. I don't know.
No, yeah, no, I mean, so we'll just have to continue some conversations offline because I was so excited to be on this podcast, to meet you, to be exposed to the topics that you've been talking about with others. And I mean, I'm many of my projects over the last 20 years have been in forestry, at the nexus of forestry issues and societal issues. So I can geek out on forestry all day.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's been fun, and this is it's just cool to get to speak to people like yourself who have a different perspective and trying to bring all these things together, right? Like that's what I guess what I'm trying to do with this podcast is just try to bring as many perspectives as possible so people can sort them out in their own way, right? So, yeah, thank you so much.
Really grateful for your time, Matt, and good to know you.
Wasn't that awesome, folks? That was a good podcast. I enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun with that one. Thanks, Laura, again for coming on. That was really enjoyable, and I hope we can do it again sometime because that was great. And I hope you guys got something out of that. Please go out and get her book, Our Next Evolution. It's on Amazon, or I'm sure it's going to be in bookstores soon. And follow Laura. She's just a very motivational person, very inspiring human being. So, that's it. Let me know what you guys think. Shoot me an email, yourforestpodcast@gmail.com. I will definitely get back to you. And share it on social media. Tell your friends about it. Whatever you can do to get it out there. Rate and review it on whatever platform you're on listening to this. If you're listening to it on the website, sometimes it's easier to go through Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, a little more versatile that way. So, yeah, this is awesome, guys. Got lots of really great conversations coming your way. A few in the bank ready to come out, and you guys are going to love them. So we'll see you in a few weeks. Take it easy.